Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Critical Perspectives. I'm here with Vanessa, and we have just, as always, been pretty busy. There's been so much going on. Obviously, the U.S. war, the Epstein war against Iran, has continued despite the fact that Donald Trump has consistently said that he is winning the war, that the United States has already won and eliminated all of Iran's missiles, that they're done, that, people of Iran want him to be the next Ayatollah, but he rejected this offer. I mean, the things that he says are ridiculous. But the rest of the world that's living in reality has seen Iran do what nobody has really done. And of course, this is really encapsulates this resistance mentality and all of the resistance coming together and really actually pushing back against this Epstein cabal and this war that is not just going to affect, and it's not just clearly affecting Iran and the entire region, but it's also, I think, going to determine very much the future of the world and where it's headed. And I've been talking about this very, very much so, of how important the outcome of this is for humanity as a whole, because of what Iran is truly fighting for. And Vanessa in the last episode really laid it out, saying, Iran is fighting evil. And that is exactly what we're seeing as things continue to escalate and develop. And Vanessa, you recently took a trip down Somor, Lebanon, and I definitely want to talk about that, and I want to hear what you experienced in this area. And I also want to talk about today the vindication of pretty much what we were saying for a year regarding the negotiations between Russia and the United States, and how that is significant in the context of everything going on in West Asia and Russia's position and Russia's actions towards Iran, towards Syria, towards pretty much its supposed allies, and how that is very much reflective of its continued determination to seek an economic and even political association with the United States and in the West. And this is despite, of course, Ukraine and NATO bombing much of Russia's military and energy sectors, and Russia not pushing back. We have seen the tide turn against Putin and against the Kremlin as a whole. We have seen divisions in the Kremlin. And it does seem like a quote unquote end to the Ukraine war is coming up as Donald Trump threatens Iran more with a ground invasion. So a lot to talk about here, Vanessa. Why don't we just start off with, what's going on your side of the world in Lebanon?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on. As you say, I spent 3 days basically on the ground, first of all, going to the southern suburbs of Beirut, so relatively close to home, where, of course, Israel has been bombing since 2024 without stopping, in all honesty, despite the ceasefire that came into effect in November 2024. Just before or the morning of the beginning of the fall of Syria, of course, the first attacks by Jolani's al-Qaeda forces back in December 2024. And so first of all, basically, I just went to the suburbs, most of which have now been evacuated. There's more than 1 million refugees now coming from the south and the southern suburbs of Beirut, and even from some of the eastern border areas with Syria, because they're also being forced to evacuate. So, of course, Lebanon, which is a relatively small country anyway, I think a population of 4 million, is basically having to now condense its population into a smaller and smaller area. And of course, the intention now which is not new. It goes back to 1948 that Israel had the intention of annexing South Lebanon up to the Litani River, which provides Lebanon with the majority of its water source. And of course, if we look at how Israel has effectively preyed on this region to secure water sources, the occupied Golan territories, which of course are Syrian, provide Israel with 30% of its water supply. They take also from Jordan, of course, from Palestine. And at the same time, they deprive Palestinians of clean water for their agricultural lands, but even for their sanitation and their drinking water. Like, for example, in Gaza, the first things they usually bomb, of course, are the desalination plants in Gaza to prevent them being able to have clean drinking water or even be able to keep Gaza clean when, particularly in this kind of weather, heavy rain, when of course there's raw sewage running in the streets. And that was bad back in 2012 when I was there. Imagine now when pretty much all of Gaza has been so heavily obliterated or damaged or just rendered uninhabitable by the genocide that's been ongoing since the 7th of October. And then basically we tried to get to the south, so south of the Litani River, to an area on the coast called Sor, or Tyre, people might know it as. But actually it was made impossible because at that point they started to bomb all of the bridges that basically enable people from the north to go to the south and vice versa. So they're cutting off the south. I mean, this is so clearly another ethnic cleansing pogrom that the Zionists are committing against the Lebanese. And of course, again, historically, this has been ongoing for decades since the creation of the State of Israel. And so, and people would have probably seen the video with Steve Sweeney, the RT journalist, basically being targeted by Zionist warplanes. The missile, very luckily for him, didn't make a direct hit, but it landed very close to him and he ended up with shrapnel injuries. Thank God he's okay. And then, yes, on the third day, I went to an area called Somor, which is basically about 50 kilometers from the border with Syria. It's in what is known as the West Bekaa. And it's an area of around, the town itself, I think, is a population of around 3,000. But throughout the history of the existence of the non-state of Israel, it has been targeted for persecution and for ethnic cleansing. Probably one of the worst was back in 1984 when, after the massacre at Sabra and Shatila, when the Phalange, the Christian forces that were aligned with the Zionist forces, were allowed to enter the camps of Sabra and Shatila, and they massacred more than 3,000 Palestinians, raped women, murdered children. And in 1984, a similar event occurred in Somor when the southern Lebanese forces, which again were aligned with Israel, entered the town itself. The Zionists were surrounding the town to prevent people coming out. And again, they opened fire, they threw grenades, on the pretext that they were trying to find those responsible for an ambush of the Druze militia a few days prior. So just to give an indication of how historically this town has suffered from the ethnic cleansing programs run by Israel and aided by certain factions within Lebanon itself. A lot of people probably don't understand how that dynamic inside Lebanon. And really, it was just so sobering to look at the damage to civilian property. There's no actual real military property in this town. It's a very small community. Most of them have evacuated. Those that remain are basically fighters, but also the elderly, who are not leaving the south because what do they face? They face a life of displacement and uncertainty, and most of them are of an age where they're just, no, I'm just going to stay here, whatever happens, right? Because they'd already evacuated back in 2024. And that was not a very pleasant experience for them for a multitude of reasons. And so now many people are kind of deciding to stay in their homes, and they're suffering as a result. And here, most of the buildings that I saw that had been destroyed by missile strikes were civilians, elderly civilians that had been killed, not fighters. At the same time, there are constantly drones and war jets in the skies above the village. We were told that one of the roads was very dangerous to take. They redirected us to another one, which is less surveilled by the drones. And we were very lucky in the sense that on that particular day, it was pouring with rain and there was very heavy cloud cover. So actually the drones couldn't operate brilliantly. So I suppose to a degree, that prevented any strikes on that particular day. Not that we necessarily would have been targeted, but potentially the fighters that we were talking to could have been targeted and so on, because they were out in the open helping us to go around the town and look at the places that had been hit. So I think, what I took away from this very much as I did in Syria is that these are ordinary people. These are just farmers and academics, students, doctors, medics, and so on, who just don't agree with Israel taking over their territory and their homes and ethnically cleansing them and expanding its territory at the expense of their people. And again, this is a very important point that we often forget when we're analyzing these situations, even in Palestine. The young men who are fighting in the resistance, they have dreams as well. They don't necessarily want to lose their lives resisting for the rest of their very young lives. They want to leave the country. They want to have a normal life. They want to go to school. They want to study. They want to become whatever profession that they've always dreamed. They want to play football. And so, it's very, the people of this region are already being dehumanized by Western media. They're already being described as terrorists or as, undeserving factions, etc. And when you actually get to meet them face to face, and you realize what a wonderful, very humble, very kind, very generous community it is here and in Syria, in Iran, in wherever you go, where the resistance exists, particularly in Gaza. And so, those 3 days, one, it was sort of incredibly sobering. The fact that when we were driving around in Nabatea, I kept seeing ambulances just parked up in random places. And afterwards we were told, well, we can't keep them at the headquarters, because if we keep them at the headquarters, Israel will just bomb and destroy all of them. So the staff, the medics, were sleeping in the ambulances. They weren't able to contact their family or to go home, because if they went home, Israel would target the entire home and kill not only the ambulance driver or the medic, but also kill the entire family. So these guys were literally sleeping in their ambulances in different places in the towns, in order that if they get struck, it's only one that gets struck, not the whole team or not the entire headquarters. And we saw this time and time again. Whenever we saw a bombed out house, they told us that they bombed the house, the medics came to try and help the wounded, and then they bombed the paramedics. So exactly what we saw in Gaza, exactly the same tactics here in Lebanon, and as far as I understand, the same tactics now in Iran. They're bombing hospitals, they're bombing medical centers, they're bombing ambulances, they're bombing paramedics when they go to the scene of a missile raid right on a civilian area. Whereas if you actually look at what Hezbollah is doing, or if you look at how Iran is fighting this war, I think we talked about this last week, they're not targeting civilians, they're targeting only military assets. And in Israel also, the majority of Israelis are reservists in the army, if not the majority, a huge number of them. And so this is again the huge differentiation between the war that the US and Israel is waging and the war of defense that the resistance in this region is waging against two of the most powerful militaries in the world today.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize also, what the intent of this is to take the entirety of southern Lebanon by force and to pit the people against each other, um, and this renewed Nakba, this an even more extensive form of Nakba towards the southern part is really what I think people need to get uh, clear is what that means, and everything you've shown in your article is that people are regular people that don't want to leave. And this is what I've encountered with some friends, that
Yeah.
they refuse to leave. They're not going to leave. This is their land. And in a way, it's very, it reinforces the mentality that we're seeing with Iran, with the resistance, with Hezbollah. But it's also just a matter of, this is my home. Why do I need to leave? And the specifics of the evil of blowing up bridges to stop people from being able to get out, or to manipulate and corral them like they're cattle. And this mentality from the Israeli regime is just very apparent in everything they do. The leaflets that they gave out, it's extremely fascistic. And I think a lot of people, kind of, we've been all focused on Iran, but a lot of things that are happening in Lebanon are extremely brave, what we're seeing, but it's not seen as brave. It's just seen as the normal thing to do, is to defend yourself. And I think after we've seen those strikes on the bridges, there was also the fact that Hezbollah pushed back, of course, against the Israeli tanks, and
Yeah.
that's something I think, like, I wanted to ask you on, like, that they escalated the operations against Israel, and Israel was in many ways put to shame. And we go back to this idea of Israel being this paper tiger, of not being as strong as it is. I mean, Iran has definitely displayed that, but people underestimated Lebanon and Hezbollah again, thinking that, oh, this is a done deal, or even trying to say, well, the Lebanese government is telling Hezbollah to disarm, so maybe, this is a done deal. And they don't, that, a lot of people in the West don't understand Hezbollah. They don't understand resistance, and they don't understand that that wasn't going to happen. That they're not just gonna give up and go away. This is it. But it's incredible to me when I see all of that on social media. This lack of understanding. Why, Vanessa? Is it so? Um, Hezbollah's actions, why, and the retaliation and the humiliation effectively against Israel, why is that such is that such a major thing that I think a lot of people are just ignoring or completely dismissing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very similar to, on a bigger scale, what Iran is doing, because it's fighting against two nuclear states. It's fighting against the entire Arab bank of the Persian Gulf, and the American bases there. And it's actually not just holding its own, it's actually winning the war from an economic perspective and from a military perspective. Of course, it's taking a lot of hits, but I don't think there is anyone on the planet today that isn't surprised by the capability of Iran and by the development that they have clearly done in the military sector for the last 40 years, despite being under crippling sanctions and isolation and blockade. And of course, we should always remember Yemen, also what they achieved since 2015, when Saudi Arabia started its unlawful aggression against Yemen back then. So, 10, 11 years ago. And Hezbollah, I was actually talking with a friend of ours last night. And again, she pointed out that had Syria actually not stood for 14 years against the regime change war, we wouldn't see the Hezbollah that we see now, because that gave them another 12 years of ability to develop, and also having Syria as that land bridge and production facility to provide them both with the technology and with the weapons that they're now using against Israel, right? So that 12-year break that they had when everyone was focused on Syria gave them the ability to basically build up their capability to deal with what is now happening. And I think now we're up to something like 30 Merkava tanks. I mean, it's really difficult to keep up because, the Hezbollah statements are coming very, very fast, more than 87 operations now. Hand-to-hand combat in a lot of the very hot areas in the south. Israel is claiming that it's advanced 8 kilometers, but there is pushback on that narrative, of course, from Hezbollah. And again, I'm not saying that Hezbollah are not taking punishment. I'm not saying that civilians are not dying in the south. They are. Today, there was a massacre in one of the southern towns where a 3-month-old baby and family were killed in an Israeli strike. So we're seeing what we always see, the massacre of civilians on the basis that they're all Hezbollah, just as we saw in Gaza. They're all Hamas, so they all deserve to be killed in this sort of ethnic cleansing, genocidal strategy that Israel has in the region. So 30 Merkava tanks. I think they've also destroyed a couple of D9 bulldozers. The hand-to-hand combat, they're causing like untold damage to the Zionist military. And actually to the point where the chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, has actually put out a red flag warning to the government, and has basically says, unless you bring in the laws to increase conscription, the IOF is effectively going to collapse. We don't have the manpower to cover all of the fronts that you're now pushing us into. So, you have Iran, although of course one can say there isn't a ground invasion yet. We're going to get onto that. But in Syria, now they've got this very strong front against Hezbollah, and they're not doing well on the ground. They never do well on the ground. Israel is like the United States. They're happy when they're bombing and droning and massacring civilians in vast numbers in a kind of shock and awe blitzkrieg campaign. But when it comes to ground invasion, and particularly against forces that are ideologically rooted in the land and in the kind of religious ideology that this is a war that they are going to win, you're not going to break that spirit. Plus, it's their terrain. Just as, Hamas, they didn't destroy all the tunnels in Gaza. Hamas is still active in Gaza. They didn't destroy them. And in Lebanon, it's even worse. It's not an enclosed area. And this is the Hezbollah fighters' land. They know every stone on this land. The Zionists don't. And, there have already been multiple reports saying, we can't cope with this. Hezbollah are just coming out of the ground at us, and we're just being surrounded. They're ambushing. We're hearing of multiple ambushes of forces where Israel, for example, has sent a spy drone in to try and draw Hezbollah out, and they've just let it pass. And then when the forces think, oh, well, it's okay then because no one stopped the drone, they've moved forward and then they're ambushed. And the fact that the jets are having to fly at relatively low altitude, partly because of the weather, they're able to actually even target war jets with the Manpad shoulder head surface to air missiles. And added to that, the weather. I think there were a number of Israeli soldiers who had to go back home because they were suffering from hypothermia. Because literally the tanks are getting bogged down in mud, which makes them a sitting target. They're just not hardy. They've been living in the lap of luxury for 100 years. They have no idea. They're not handling the hardship that is now finally karmically coming back their way from both Iran and Hezbollah. And as I've said before, Yemen hasn't even entered the war officially yet. The Iraqi resistance is also coming up against very strong attacks by the United States and Israel, and it is responding very forcefully. There are mixed reports. We're hearing that a huge majority of the US forces are unable to function or to operate inside Iraq because their bases have been destroyed, just as they have in the Arab Zionist states on the banks of the Persian Gulf. And so Iraq is also claiming that it's not claiming, it is stating that it's going to be responding more forcefully. And it has also put out this threat that if Jolani, who was put in power in Syria, tries to attack Lebanon, which is possible. I've been talking to people here. It depends how well Israel does. If Israel really starts struggling on the ground, they may well force Jolani's hand to at least send the ISIS proxies to attack Lebanon, to create another front, to try and distract some of the Hezbollah forces away from the battle in the south. I don't think that's going to work because we have to remember there are a huge number of Syrian Arab Army soldiers who left in December 2024, who are both in Iraq, around 70,000, and here in Lebanon, I think around 25 to 30,000. So it would make sense to me if they're deployed to the eastern border to defend it against the ISIS attacks. But you also have even the factions. Lebanon is so complicated because you have the government still trying to now, as you said, stab Hezbollah in the back. Even Craig McIver has gone out on X and saying, what is the government doing? You're actually working against your own country because you're undermining international law, which states very clearly that a people under attack or under aggression or occupation have the absolute, inalienable right to defend themselves, to resist. So the fact that the government in Lebanon is actually trying to undermine that resistance when the Lebanese army hasn't lifted a finger, they haven't fired a shot. Although I'm also hearing, and I think we mentioned this last week, Hezbollah is actually trying to protect the army because they know that they're not going to be capable of taking on the Zionist forces. So to an extent, Hezbollah has kind of said, no, get out of the way and just let us fight because, you're not equipped, you're not prepared, you're not paid enough to do this. Not that Hezbollah is paid either. But they have a vested interest in defending their land, whereas many elements in the army don't. So they've basically effectively said to them, no, it's fine. Move back to wherever the president wants you to go back to, and it's not a problem. We actually prefer, in a way, that you're not here to hinder us in the war, right? But with the threat from Jolani, this idea of creating division between Hezbollah and other factions within Lebanese society is going to also fall apart because they're more afraid of Jolani in Syria than they are of Hezbollah. So at that point, what happens? They're going to be dependent on Hezbollah to actually defend their towns and villages if this happens. So the government here is really walking a very short plank into a very deep ocean right now. It's like it's unable to win. The problem is that it's obviously Washington, Saudi Arabia, and Israel that are putting the pressure on it to try and derail the Hezbollah resistance efforts. And one last thing that I want to make, point that I want to make is for people to understand the northern settlements, so in northern Palestine on the border with southern Lebanon, they were created between 1948 and 51 to effectively be a human shield. So not only are there military bases in amongst those illegal settlements, but those human beings, and there have been numerous meltdowns from various officials in the northern settlement, sort of saying, you know, we didn't sign up for this. We're just getting bombarded. There's no air defense here. No one is here to protect us. They're having, I mean, they really are going into meltdown. But the fact is, that's what they signed up for. If they actually look back at history and look at the statements from various officials within the Zionist regime from 1948 onwards, that was their role, was to create this buffer zone on Palestinian territory against Lebanon. And that's, of course, why now they want to move that buffer zone up to the Litani River. Again, secures water source for them, but also secures all of that southern territory. And they're not going to stop there, let's be clear. They've invaded Beirut before, and that is going to be their final intention also.
Wow. What you said, though, about the use of Jolani's forces kind of backfiring is actually quite insightful. I actually haven't heard very much about that. So, because Lebanon is complicated, and I think you know, there are people that don't that are just affected, that aren't necessarily, you know, with Hezbollah the same way that we have seen in Iran, for example. Some of the opposition or the reformists come out and so in support of Iran after the United States bombed and killed the Ayatollah Khamenei and really started attacking them the same way we saw in Venezuela. You know, these attacks by Washington tend to unite the populations. These attacks by the Zionists in attempts to divide kind of do actually the opposite. And they have been doing the opposite, you know, in terms of bringing people together, because people actually understand more clearly who the enemy is when they're being bombed and when they're being threatened and when they're being directly targeted. And when, you know, for example, Hezbollah is the only thing that stands between Israel and it taking over the entirety of the country, then I think it becomes quite clear who is actually on their side. And with all of that you said, we can go into the United States now, of course, threatening a ground invasion of Iran, which is absolutely suicidal. There's no way they can manage these kids that they're sending, the kids, the poor people's kids, essentially, to fight these rich men's wars. But that's what it is. I mean, you're not going to see the predator elites children go to fight this war, not even as generals, not even as higher ups. You're just going to literally see pretty much the majority of everybody else. And there's so much propaganda in the United States, which calls everything else propaganda, you know, saying, oh, we're going to offer you student debt forgiveness. We're going to look, you can buy a home really easily, because they do get discounts pretty much on everything, especially on houses. And right now it's getting impossible for young people especially, to buy homes. And so basically the Donald Trump administration is deploying 10,000 more, supposedly 10,000 up to 10,000 right now to the Middle East, is what they say, but it's specifically for the war in Iran. And this is from Fox News here. They're going to consider sending up 10,000 additional. That's from the already, I think, 3,000 that they sent before. This is, of course, for the Operation Epic Fury. And the Wall Street Journal ended up talking about this recently. And basically, Donald Trump is insisting, and has been sort of threatening, essentially, how that this is happening if Iran doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz, if Iran doesn't cooperate And remember, just a few days ago, they talked about having conversations with Iran, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, they've had conversations with Iran. And here are the points that Iran agreed to. They agreed to stopping their nuclear development. They agreed to this, and none of that was true. And it's being
No, of course not.
blasted on X, not just X, but on regular mainstream media, which people should know better by now. But it's being blasted. But you hear from somebody related to the matter, from somebody close to the matter, but you never see Iran saying this sort of thing. And then Iran will come out hours later and say, this is absolute insanity. We have never said this. We don't want to negotiate. We're not going to negotiate until our terms are met when we want. And we have seen all of the officials come out vocally and tell this to Trump. But, again, the U.S. People, they don't get this information, so all they're seeing is this just very psychologically planned display. But I think we touched on it last time, is it's not really sticking the way they want it to this time around. And I think that's partially because of everything that's happened before that we've been lied to, that has led to this, right? So in turn, Iran has said that they're sending 1 million fighters that are going to prepare to supposedly battle it out with the U.S. if they do it. And we know Iran has said, we're waiting for you. We're waiting for you. Come here, because they know the United States is not equipped to fight the terrain. They're not equipped to, they have no idea about their enemy. And this is something I've discussed before, I think on a show I did. The United States has a tendency militarily and politically, but especially culturally, to dismiss and not really get to know their enemy, because it works very quickly for them. They go, they bomb, they take out, they leave, and it's worked every time. With Iran, they're facing this pushback that they've not encountered before, and they are completely out of their depth. They don't know what to do with Iran. They don't know exactly how to assess them, because they assess them as they assess everybody else, not as a 1,000-year-old civilization that is far more capable than it's far more intelligent. Not just the politicians, but the military that doesn't just act on impulse, that isn't just going to bombard everything, carpet bomb everything, and expect, to just take it all. And that has been a very, very strong miscalculation by the United States. And they have never had to do the work to get to know their enemy. It's like going into a game of chess and playing checkers. They think they can just, blah blah blah, and they're not
That's
realizing
a good description.
they're fighting with the grand chess masters here, and they're way in over their head. This is a mission to death for these people in the United States. This is not going to go over well at all whatsoever. So I for me, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, I thought even that they weren't even going to do it, because I thought you have to know that this is not going to work out the way you think. And they've surprised me with their stupidity and sending these kids who know absolutely nothing about the region they're going into. They know nothing about Iran. They know nothing about anything. They're just going there because they're told to. And I have family in the army, and I have my young cousins that are in the army. And so this is, for me, it's like, you tell them, like, you know what you're fighting for. Like, this is not, and they're not like eager people to go fight to kill people. I think this is psychologically going to do something to these people like it did before in Iraq. And these
Vietnam,
people are in Vietnam before that, because this would be a Vietnam, because there's no way they're going to be able to have this defeat that they think they are.
And they had no knowledge about Vietnam. I mean, they were just being sold on a jingoistic tagline, basically. And to be honest, and I guess that's one question I want to ask you. I'll just come in with what I think about the whole ground invasion idea, because there's a lot of theories circulating. But I guess, we've had the Winter Soldier, we've had Vietnam, we've had countless wars, Iraq. And then, of course, we've had moving to the strategy of using proxies that we've seen both in Afghanistan, but also more recently, of course, in Syria, and using PMCs, private military contractors like DynCorp and so on. So they have tried to kind of obfuscate or prevent the actual threat to American foot soldiers in this way, but I don't see how that's possible in Iran. I mean, it's a vast country. So I guess my question, I'll just talk about the ground invasion, but my question back to you is how is this happening again in America? I don't get this. I don't get how after all of this, it's happening again. There are glimmers of mutiny, like we saw on the USS Gerald Ford, which is now moored in Greece, in Crete, not anywhere near Iran. After there were deliberately blocked toilets, and then I think there were fires on board. And we know there's been pushback against the religious messaging from the insane Christian Zionist commanders, including Hegseth. So there is a degree that there's a little flicker of pushback, but it's not, it's not a towering inferno yet. And I don't really understand how that is. But so just keep that in mind, because I think I'll go off on the ground invasion now. I don't understand how a ground invasion is going to work. Really, I've had various people sending me various, I have to say, Western male military analysts, telling me exactly how Trump is going to, invade from the south, Balochistan, because in Balochistan there's a degree of separatism there. There's all how he's going to try and take over Kaj Island. Despite the fact that there are, I don't know how many Iranians can fit on Kaj Island, but there are huge numbers of Iranians going to huge lengths to be on Kaj Island to defend it, right? So that's one thing. And plus, you're in the Strait of Hormuz. How on earth are you going to land troops and equipment? And that's my next point, is there has been chatter on social media that no equipment yet has been requisitioned to accompany this land invasion in Iran. So there's no tanks, there's no, again, I'm not a military expert, there's no artillery, there's nothing that they're going to need to actually run a long-term campaign, because this isn't a special forces campaign. This isn't a campaign that you can send in a few hundred Marines to take over Tehran. It's not going to happen, right? I mean, history tells us it's not going to happen. So that's a few points. And then I started kind of thinking, well, okay, let's look at the proxy aspect. Are they going to try and trigger some kind of proxy attack through Pakistan, for example? Because, of course, they got rid of Imran Khan. Saudi Arabia for decades has been effectively running Wahhabi schools in Pakistan. So I can imagine how that is a possibility. There's also another possibility from Azerbaijan, because Israel and the US have been establishing surveillance there, military presence under the pretext of corporations running the Zangezur corridor, right? So that's another potential, but that would be American troops. And I'm not sure where they're moving these 3,000, 10,000, 25,000 million troops, whatever Trump comes up with next. Where are they going to move them to? There's no operational bases left in the Zionist Arab states. Iraq is under attack. They've already sort of withdrawn from bases there. They've withdrawn from the majority of bases in Syria. even prior to the war against Iran. There's only a couple of bases, I think, in the far northeast, but I mean, you're talking a couple of hundred personnel, and certainly not major bases, not where you can send 3,000 troops, for example. There has been recent information coming in of American troop presence in Damascus, in Lebanon, where close to the coastal area of Batroun. I think you put that up in the show notes before we started. And in Djibouti, which of course is a Mossad stronghold on the Horn of Africa, basically facing Yemen. But again, I'm unable to envisage how they're logistically going to be able to do all of this. Because if they want to send troops, one theory, to the south of Iran, they're going to have to pass through maritime channels that are under the control of Iran. And we know that Iran can mine those routes. We know that Iran, I mean, today there was a Thai tanker attacked in the Straits of Hormuz that is basically, crash landed on one of the islands there because it didn't ask permission to go through the Straits of Hormuz. So I don't know, just logically, rationally. Plus, we have to remember that Trump is basing all of his statements, not his decisions, because I don't really think they're his decisions. He's basing all of his statements and all of his claims on a 2-minute briefing every day, which is mostly AI and animation, because that's the level of his attention span, right? All of these meetings are behind closed doors, so the public is not aware of what is being discussed. You've got congressman like Senator Chris Murphy saying this is just a disaster. Of course, he has skin in the game. He is obviously opposed to Trump, but nevertheless, you have to take into account what he's saying. He appears to be genuinely concerned about this, right? So I'm struggling to see on what basis and on what track are they going to be able to, one, get large numbers of American troops into the region, bearing in mind the region is now on fire. And then how on earth are they going to land them in Iranian territory, which the majority of which is mountainous?
Yep.
I'm, the Kurdish proxy has relatively failed from what I understand, because Iran hit that very early on, and now you're seeing Shia elements within the Kurds saying, no, we support the government in Iran, et cetera, et cetera. So you're seeing that breakdown. You're seeing marches and demonstrations of support from the Balochistan elements in the south of Iran. So that also hasn't worked to the extent that they thought it would. So I don't know. I mean, if anyone in our audience is watching and they can work it all out, great. But please don't send me more white Western military analysts to talk about a region that, please, because I've seen them all and I'm still kind of scratching my head. And that isn't, it's not a criticism, but it's just like, why don't people talk to regional analysts and people that actually understand the culture, the history, the civilization, the regional dimensions and complexities? That's my gripe on that side.
No, I mean, I see this happen all the time, and I get really frustrated because I'm like, why are we, with all respect, I understand the military expertise that is needed, and when it comes to the military aspect, but when it comes to understanding the cultural, regional aspects, they don't know. They're looking at it from a very Western point centric lens, and this is my issue with media as a whole. Like this happens all the time, and this is kind of what I was talking about. The United States doesn't really get to know their enemy, and that includes journalists. Like, even if you're not covering it from an enemy perspective or a threat perspective, they tend to dismiss very important cultural, important just interpersonal dynamics and like the way the other side, for lack of a better term, does this, like does things, and the way they behave and the way they conduct their organization. They just look at their perspective and try to mold the world to fit into that perspective instead of looking at the world as it is and trying to understand it. It comes from a place of arrogance because they've not had to actually get to know people outside their orbit. Because we've been the
Mm.
ones in the United States who, and in the West largely, who've had the orbit around us. So we've never had to actually go do the digging because
Mm.
everybody has to accommodate to us. And it really is actually kind of subconscious for a lot of people. I don't even think they realize they're doing it when they do it.
Mm.
But it definitely happens. And to answer your question about why do you think, why is this happening again? Like, why aren't people seeing through it? I think people are seeing through it. I think people my age in their 30s are seeing through it. But I think people who are younger, who are not alive during the war in Iraq or who were like just born or born after,
Mm.
they don't see it. Like they have a harder time because they didn't experience that, or they like they can see what's happening right now with Palestine and everything and all of the lies, but they didn't live through the war in Iraq consciously, so they aren't recognizing the same patterns that some of us are like, wait a minute, like, this is the exact same language, the exact same excuse, the exact you could play. I think we played a video with Pasta the other day of like George Bush next to Trump, and it's basically the same thing, just a different guy, different cadence
Yeah.
delivering it, but it's basically the same words, the same reasoning behind it. I think that's part of it. The other part is just the US is the most propagandized country in the world. There's a
Mm.
video going around of spring breakers, and I don't it's not fake. It's not fake. It's a video of this guy interviewing people on spring break, and they have got to be some of the dumbest people you'll ever come across in your life. And they're 20. So of course, when you're 20, I get it, but like they know nothing about anything. And that's kind of like the
Mm.
US culture. It's like it's not even present, I think, so much in Europe or in the UK. There's a little bit more, a
Mm.
significant amount, let's be honest, more intellectualism that goes on there versus in the US, we don't value that for the most part. Donald Trump is a reality TV star. And that's kind of the essence of a lot of that. It's not everybody, but it is
Mm.
like a portion of people who've remained completely propagandized, completely shielded because they haven't had to experience any bombs. They haven't had to experience anything. We've always been protected and cocooned. And the moment that stops, which is why what Iran is doing is so important, because the airports now are going insane. I don't know if you've seen the videos, but the lines at the airport are insane because the TSA isn't getting paid. They're not getting funded. And so
Mm.
people are quitting, and there's nobody to like manage the airports. Flights are being canceled and delayed. And a lot of people say this is kind of playing right into that because they want chaos. They want people to feel, kind of confused and just do what they need to do to continue surviving, because that's basically what people do. And for a lot of kids who've grown up with debt, who have, like I said, an impossibility in getting ahead in life, this last generation, they're offered substantial amounts of money to just join the army, and they don't have any other choice because, or they feel like they don't have any other choice because they don't have money, their parents don't have money, they're in debt. There's a lot of things going around. I'm not going to make any money going to school, so why don't I just join the army? I mean, this is the thing that a lot of people
Mm.
feel. It's not coming from a place of I'm patriotic and I want to fight for the US. For most people, it's not coming from that. It's coming out of a place of need. So they put people in these positions where
Mm.
they have to be like subservient. Like there's a lot of,
Mm.
for example, people that go into engineering and they're very smart and they want to have a good job, but they don't realize that the only engineering jobs are the jobs in the sector of war, to make
Mm.
missiles for Lockheed Martin, to make missiles for all of these companies. And my brother, he was an engineer, and when he was faced with that, he refused to go to work for the defense industry, which is actually pushed on you as a success story, as something you need to do because they pay the most and because that is like the representation of being successful in the United
Mm.
States. And so it takes a very specifically aware person to actually say, yeah, I don't want to go work in an industry where my contributions are going to go help kill children at a school in a
Yeah.
job in Iran, because that's ultimately what ends up happening with these
Mm.
US based missiles, whether they're tomahawks or whether they're another missile. So that I think that's largely why. But the other thing is, you know, there is, I think, a bit more of an understanding though from the past. I think there are more people speaking out. We've seen videos from the military. We've seen
Mm.
videos just from people saying we don't want this war. This is not our war. I just think it's slow to churn because of the necessities of people. And once that hits, of course, then I think that's when we're gonna really be able to see. But I just want to share with you this thing that happened too, because the U.S. Army did raise the upper age for recruits to 42. And now it doesn't
Mm.
matter if you have marijuana charges, because a lot of people got marijuana charges because it was illegal, but everybody was doing it.
Mm-mm.
So they don't care about any of this now. Now you can be 42 years old and go to the army. So that tells me, you know, that their recruiting numbers are very low. That tells me
Mm.
that people aren't like voluntarily saying, yeah, let's go fight Iran. That because you wouldn't have a need to do this
Yeah.
if you were getting the numbers you were getting, right? So
Mm.
there is a change. It's just not significant enough, I think, yet for people to stop anything. And you know, we haven't stopped anything in a long time. We don't really have people in the streets um, fighting against this war. You'll have it in the usual spots like Los Angeles or New York, you know, where people are actually, you know, doing demonstrations. But outside of
Mm.
that, you're not really going to see these demonstrations. People are just like hoping it's finished, that it goes away. You know, there's still
Yeah.
there's still the language of the terrorist aspect, because we have been thrown this programming for a long time, right? Like, oh, the Middle East, they're
Mm.
just always fighting each other. Oh, the Middle East, there's just these groups are terrorist groups. Like, it's like people just don't go beyond that. And it's, I don't know how people break through it, because I don't even know how I broke through it. But because the propaganda is just so, or from the day you're born, it's
Concentrated.
constant.
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
but it can happen, I think, and this is why I think there's a lot of social media control to try to confuse people, because
Mm.
that's where younger people are going, is social media, right? And that's why TikTok was taken over, because they were learning too much. And now, you know,
Yeah.
you have an Israeli in
Yeah.
charge of TikTok. So
And I also wonder, just thinking aloud, you know, as this war continues, I don't see it ending anytime soon. Is there potential for bringing in forced conscription? And then, of course, you have the ability by the government to bring in emergency laws and surveillance and the whole Palantir
yeah,
surveillance capture network. You know, I think also because you always have to look at both sides of the coin of what is going on and the long-term measures that they're looking to bring in. And of course, war is the perfect environment, just as COVID was the perfect environment to establish lockdowns and to test the malleability of a population, basically.
yeah.
Do you think that's a potential? Do you think they would get away with any kind of forced conscription if, for example, there were a false flag? I mean,
Mhm.
that's another potential that's going to come in there.
I think the false flag aspect though is kind of over, like people are aware of that, I think, right now. Like it's kind of a
Mm.
joke. But I mean, I don't think everybody is, but I think it's definitely, I would say, more more than it was. People are mocking the false flag thing. Nobody's buying a lot of these, little random attacks that have a Muslim guy wearing a shirt that says like "I love." It's just laughable. People just don't buy it. Even if they don't understand it. They're like, this is weird. Like, I do think there will be drastic pushback if there is some sort of conscription or draft,
Mm,
because Trump is highly unpopular now. The only people that support him are the hardcore MAGA that he can't do no wrong with. But the other people that did support him are now creating their own sort of, you know, little area with people like Kent, like John Kent or Josh Kent, whatever his
mm.
name is, who came
Joe
out and
Kent, I think.
started Joe, yeah, and he started talking about how Israel and the government is controlled by Israel, and so ex-CIA guy, of course, I don't trust him. I don't trust anything that's coming out of his mouth, and I think he is quite controlled opposition, so to speak. But
Well, yeah, he's the replacement frontman, as many people
yeah,
have been sort of pointing out, basically.
exactly. And so there's going to be this new creation, right, in the Republican space where it's like they're kind of gearing people in to go this route. So, but in terms of Trump, I think if Trump were to do that, I think he would face actual backlash, especially when um, things are not going well domestically in the United
Mm,
States. I don't know if it would be enough to stop it, but I think it would actually send people out in the streets because there hasn't been a draft since World War II. So it would
yeah.
be like extremely, extremely,
There wasn't a draft
drastic.
for Vietnam. Vietnam didn't have a
Uh,
draft.
well, yeah, but I guess since Vietnam, but I think at the level that we would need it, it
Yeah.
would require for it to
Yeah,
be
it would
like
have to
that
be.
massive. And there
Yeah.
was pushback, if you recall, during the Vietnam years. People
Mm,
literally left and fled the country, and like even some of the
yeah.
top politicians didn't go fight. There's a lot of pushback against these people that somehow didn't end up going to. The rich never go to war, so they found a
Mm.
way to finagle themselves towards that. But um yeah, well, we could talk about this all day, but I do want to talk about Russia because
Yeah.
um since we're short on time, although I think, you know, the Russia thing is hugely related to this. We've always talked about how Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner are the ones that are supposed to do the negotiations in the Middle East. Well, they've been the ones sent to do it in Ukraine, related to the Ukraine war. But I really want to mention how Russia has been not reacting to the attacks coming from Ukraine. And a lot of people who supported Russia have been quite upset with the
Mm.
Kremlin because they feel like now it's war fatigue, right? We're 4 years into this war. They're pointing out it's longer than the Great Patriotic War. Things are not good at home. Inflation is high. There's a lot of issues. There's a lot of censorship. People are complaining about that as well. There's weird things going on that I think we may have to touch on even more next time, is the
Yeah.
killing cattle and farm animals by the government. It is by the government. And then there's also the trusting of the United States and their Zionist representatives, Kushner and Trump, into deals when every single deal that they've made before has consistently led you on the wrong path. And then there's the last part that a lot of people aren't talking about, is Iran, and how Iran is taking on the US and how they're behaving and how they're actually
Mm.
going after them with the intensity that some patriotic Russians would like Putin to use on
Yes,
Ukraine.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's not giving them a good example. They're like, wait a minute, what are you doing? And then there's the issue that, of course, Ukraine has been targeting and striking Russian ports. It's been targeting Russian
Mm.
energy infrastructures. And
Yep.
so this is the oil. And what has Russia done? Russia has not done anything. And so we've been talking about this for a while, that the Kremlin was seeking this economic expansion, this relationship. They weren't moving about this ideologically. They were moving about this more so pragmatically, right? And then we have the likes of Kirill Dmitriev and meeting with Representative Luna. And I know you had a video. I don't know if you can bring it up, but you had a video, and she's actually, and I'm not just being mean or just an asshole. Like, she's actually she's actually an idiot. And I think a lot of people don't know this outside of the United States, but she's known as one of our idiot representatives. I think she came from a weird position, like in entertainment or something. I don't know. She's not a very smart person. I'm not saying that everybody that is an idiot, but she is actually particularly that. And Kirill Dmitriev and her constantly like talk on social media. Like, they constantly give accolades to each other. And she posted this today for the first time in close to a quarter of a century. 5 members of Congress met with 5 members of the Russian Duma to discuss peace and bilateral relations. As representatives of the world's 2 greatest nuclear superpowers, we owe our citizens open dialogue, ideas, and open lines of communication. We will continue to foster this dialogue and push for peace, blah, blah, blah. So it's just, it's very strange that this is happening at the same time that the United States is engaged in a war with Iran, supposedly one of Russia's biggest allies.
And Kirill Dmitriev has just put out an article, I think, in the Politico saying, yay, now we're going to cripple the EU with high oil prices. Now, I just want to get your sorry if I've interrupted, but when you were talking there, the attacks on the basically the oil industry in Russia comes after the Russian abstention at the UN Security Council, effectively criminalizing Iran. And on the same day of that abstention, Kirill Dmitriev was in the US and getting sanctions lifted off Russian oil, which was a necessary lifeboat, really, for their national wealth fund and their fiscal revenue fund and all of this. They were hemorrhaging from the loss of oil revenue. And then boom, almost immediately, when they appear to have kind of hugely benefited from the war against Iran and the closure of the Hormuz Straits by then increasing their revenue by 150 million a day by having the sanctions lifted off the oil, Ukraine bombs the oil facilities, right? Then you have Kirill Dmitriev saying, yeah, we're going to be putting up the prices of oil to Europe, and literally rubbing his hands with glee at this idea. And of course, we've seen this, and we've pointed out this partnership between Kirill Dmitriev and, by default, Putin, because Putin is acknowledging and approving of everything that Dmitriev is doing, including the meetings with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. And so to me, I don't know if it looks like to you, but this looks like an extension of the war between the EU and the US, where the US is saying, okay, we'll get Russia out of the oil revenue hole. And EU is saying, no, you won't, because we'll get Ukraine now to bomb the Russian oil facilities. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, and this battle that's going on, Kirill Dmitriev is playing really well into, because he's constantly going after the EU and saying they constantly, get in the way of negotiations with between Russia and the United States. And so there's this manipulation theater going on where we're supposed to believe that the United States is not going to, and NATO are going to be fighting. And I think to a degree there are these competing interests, and the United States has not hesitated before, right? As Victoria Nuland said, F the EU, they've not hesitated to throw them under the bus, to completely destroy them. And of course, with the Nord Stream pipeline as well. I mean, that was directly an attack on them eventually. I mean, the energy the scarcity that it created has plunged Europe into a decline that I don't think they're going to get out of anytime soon. And apart from that, though, you have the Kirill Dmitriev being positioned as a Kremlin spokesperson, and he is. He may not be somebody that holds a position within the state or the Federation, the Russian Federation as a whole. But he is clearly the one that's doing this economic push because he's a businessman, and he's a businessman that's well versed with U.S. and Western corporate sector. So he's the guy that's doing that, and he's the face of that, and he's constantly talking about the price of oil hitting 100, the price of oil hitting, at XYZ per barrel. And like, so what I find very interesting is the fact that a lot of people are pointing out it went from naivety to just outright like stupidity, right? And so I think Russia thinks that people are looking at this and saying, oh, well, this is good. The war is ending and all of that, which I think some people, yes, want the war to end. A lot of people want the war to end, and Russians especially, but not under the terms of making a deal with the United States when you've seen what they're doing, and not responding to the attack on your energy sector when you said that was a red line. It makes them look completely weak. It makes them look like, what are you doing? Like, so they can just go after every single red line and you're not going to do anything about it. You're just going to let it happen. And so if they let it happen, guys, what does that mean? That means that there's something else at play here, right? That this isn't just a war about, oh, I have these red lines and this is a patriotic thing and we're fighting. No, they're not Iran. And I think a lot of people thought they had more of an ideological fight in this. But what we're seeing here is that the Kremlin doesn't have that. That a lot of people who went to war in Donbass who are dying, a lot of people whose family members are dying for this war, they are looking at this as some sort of like betrayal, because it's like my family member died in Donbass for you to just allow them to do this for some sort of cheap deal. That's kind of how it's coming across, because those are the actual patriots that are living over there and that think that, or the actual patriots thought Russia was fighting for this ideological sense of existence, this independence, this freedom. But that's not clearly what Russia's fighting for. Russia's fighting to be on the good side with economic interests with the United States and the West, and pretty much also China and anybody else that wants to do business with them. That's what they're doing. There's literally nothing else. And here, Kirill Dmitriev says everything will be on Russia's terms, that everything in terms of the negotiations is going to do that. He said that
they're dreaming.
We have a very strong position. We have the most powerful resources. All projects are carefully calculated, and they're definitely beneficial to Russia. He also emphasized unfriendly countries are unaware of the benefits Russia will receive from strengthening economic ties to the U.S. So they're putting it all into this basket, all the eggs in this basket of economic ties. And he says our enemies don't want this interaction, like the EU, I guess. As soon as we meet, as soon as there's economic interaction, the enemies howl. They don't want us to discuss any projects, and projects must be only beneficial to Russia. Only those that create synergies are working together, he clarified. So, but none of them have talked about the economic gains, as this person pointed out, of Russia, like the benefits to Russia. None of them have talked about that. It's absolute lunacy.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And also the other point that I want to make is how we had been saying, I think for a while now, that Russia is not providing intelligence to Iran to enable it to target US and Israeli assets in the region. That has now, and also that they were supplying drone technology. And we made the argument, no, the drone technology went the other way around, because actually the Iranian drones were absolutely necessary for the war in Ukraine. And the Iranian drone technology, if anybody wants to actually look into this deeper, they can go to the Political Aficionado channel and watch Ahsan Safanajad's last video, where he breaks down all of the strategic partnership between Russia, particularly, but also China, and the weapons that have and haven't been supplied, and the technology that has definitely not been shared between Iran and Russia. And now you have two denials, one from Dmitry Peskov, who said just absolute point blank, no, we're not supplying intelligence and we're not supplying drone technology. And now you have Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, actually coming out and saying the same thing. I mean, what he says is quite funny. He doesn't credit the Chinese Beidou system, which Iran is using, the military component in that system. And potentially that is providing them with the surveillance they need to target the US and Israeli assets in the Arab Zionist states. But what he says, well, yeah, I mean, they know where the American troops are. Like, why do they need it? So he's quite funny in how he kind of wriggles out of it. But my point always was, Russia stood down and allowed Israel to target Iranian assets and personnel and even the embassy in Damascus as part of a deconfliction agreement with Israel in Syria. So why on earth would they now, when we know that they lean more toward, they're more inclined towards Israel long term than they are towards either West Asia or Persia. In fact, Persia has always been a target for them to annex the northern territories of Iran and capture the Caspian Sea, control of the Caspian Sea and the warm water port. That has, throughout history, been Russia's long-held goal in Iran. And so just to point this out, that we were very clear about this, that it didn't make any sense that Russia was supplying intelligence or drone technology. And now suddenly it's becoming a sort of popular consensus because it's impossible to push back against what is being said by multiple Russian officials denying this, right? So I think that's quite important. But I also just wanted to come back to this, what's her name? Anna Paulina Luna, who's this? Yeah. I mean, I had to laugh because I just put in a search on Syria. And so in 2025, she was saying Syria must stop violent jihadists carrying out massacres. Dude, you put those violent jihadists in power in Syria that are now carrying out massacres, right? But even funnier, back in March 2023, so she's now the linchpin negotiating with Russia and Kirill Dmitriev, which kind of indicates the importance that Trump is putting on it if she's considered sort of intellectually challenged, let's say. So in March 2023, she basically put out a tweet with a video of her very bad speech. And she said, as far as I know, members of Congress don't swear an oath to the people of Syria and Ukraine. And I wanted to just put underneath it, it's old now, but I can't. But yeah, but you do to Israel, because literally the members of Congress have to sign an oath of allegiance to Israel, which is why Cynthia McKinney was kind of blacklisted in Congress because she basically refused to sign it. And in this, she's talking about, well, Assad and Putin are tight. That's her language. She said to the point where Putin even has oil tankers on the western coast of Syria. So this is the evolution of her thinking from 2023 to 2025 to now, basically, hugging and kissing Kirill Dmitriev and making deals with Russia after how many years of sanctions and war and so on, Cold War even before, like.
So she's being used like to do this because she's an idiot, and I mean it's just. And Kirill Dmitriev is like praising her like some sort of peacemaker, and he's praised Trump as a peacemaker, but they don't want peace. This is what I want to finish off by reiterating this point that I'm still getting people telling me that, but Russia is providing drones and satellite and intelligence, and I'm like, no, they're not. And I show them videos of Peskov. I show them videos of Lavrov, and they say, well, of course they're lying about that. They don't want people to know. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're literally this is not how Russians are. They're not going to lie to your face. They literally, what they do is they omit, or they don't say anything when they don't want to like give the information. They omit. They don't like flat out lie like the Americans. They just omit information. This is like a cultural thing that a lot of these people don't understand. Like, it's insane. Like, they want to create a story that Iran is going to go is needs Russia's help, but it's the other way around. And so it's really, it's, yes, it's insulting towards Iran, but it also shows like how people just frame events to what they want to believe is true. And it's been so frustrating. And now with Lavrov saying it, I think that adds another layer, because some people don't like Dmitry Peskov
Peskov.
and think he's just gonna, say whatever he's told to say. But no, like, Lavrov has actually been quite critical of kind of saying opposite things that we're hearing from Kirill Dmitriev and the likes of Putin. So there's kind of this whole thing going on. But then there's also this, and a lot of people got mad that I shared this video because I don't understand though why. Like, it's not the whole thing he says, but it's a very important thing he says for people to understand. It's another layer as to why Russia was never going to join Iran in a fight. They're never going to provide this sort of intelligence because, first of all, as we talked about months ago, the strategic partnership with Iran never included a defense pact like it did with North Korea. And then both China and Russia have this relationship with Israel, and Putin here outlines it clearly. He said that Israel is almost a Russian-speaking country. 2 million people from the Soviet Union and Russia live there. We take that into account. And this was when he was asked why he wasn't assisting Iran in the conflict with Israel.
Yeah.
This is an older video, but none of that has changed. And none of what he said, everything he said. So I don't understand why people are getting their panties in a twist. He said this. He said this.
Well, and also, because I think it was Gilbert Doctorov that in the last few days was basically talking about the Russians in Israel. And he said, also, you have to understand that those Russians hate Putin and they hate the current government in Russia. So he actually said there are analysts in Russia that are saying, why are we basically worrying about the Russians in Israel? They're our enemies.
Yeah.
Literally, he used the word enemy. Right. So it doesn't make sense. And there's also, even if you look at the whole speech, right, there's one section where he says, in relation to Iran, he says, we always fulfill obligations with Iran. No, they don't. They reneged on the S-300 deal in 2010, and Iran had to take them to court and threatened to sue them for billions until they finally delivered them because George W. Bush had told Putin, please don't supply them. The same in Syria. S-300s were promised in Syria, and Netanyahu said, please don't send the S-300s to Syria. So as far as I know, it's still very sort of clouded in conspiracy and secrecy. But as far as I know, they came in, but they never trained the Syrian Arab army to use them. They were not used in anger to prevent Israeli attacks on Syria. So I'm sorry, even if you look at the whole speech, it still raises the same questions. So the fact that you took that one section out, which is very relevant on its own, even when you put it in context of the rest of the speech, it's still a question that should be raised, because why is he protecting however many million Russians that are in Israel that are now fighting against Iran and fighting against Palestine and fighting against Lebanon? Why is he defending them if they're the enemies of Russia, as described by many Russian analysts, right? It still doesn't make sense. Sorry, it doesn't. You don't make it make sense by adding more of what he said. It actually makes it, in my view, more confused. The final paragraph that he says, I still haven't figured out what the heck he means in it, actually. I haven't got it, but I think I sent it to you. I don't even understand this.
I don't buy that. That's why. I mean, I think maybe it might be a reason, but I think it's more so just an affinity with Israel and
exactly.
the interests that they're looking at, because this is not an ideological government. They're not ideologically, patriotically going to fight with Ukraine over this. That's what they said. but that's not what this is truly really about. And I think that's what's, you know, I've realized too, but I think a lot of Russians and other people who are super patriotic realize. And the last thing I just want to share is like, I don't even, I
Mm,
think I don't follow this person. I don't know who they are, but this person said, as someone who identifies as Russian, speaks Russian, and loves Putin, it's sad to see Russia becoming a laughingstock due to its constant gullibility and failure to understand that no one in the West is your friend or partner. Every single Western leader views Russia as an enemy they can lie to, simply because Russia, or perhaps just Putin, secretly wants to belong to the Western club. They will never accept us. We are not them and they are not us. Accept this reality and do what's best for your people. This is how some people are feeling. And there's been a lot of criticism
yeah,
towards Russia, towards Putin for this as well. Like, and I'll talk more about this next time, the domestic issues that are happening that
yeah,
correlate very well with the international issues. And that's the only reason why I will talk about them. But a lot of pushback is coming towards Putin. For the first time in history, the approval rating of the party that he is a part of um, has hit below 30%. So this is like
yeah,
unprecedented, their lack of actions towards um, the Ukraine, but towards NATO as a whole. This kind of cozying up to the Trump Zionist wing. People are talking about him siding with the Zionists, and Iran's display doing the opposite of that hasn't painted them
mm,
in a really good picture. And I think people are catching on to that. And as you said, you know, a lot of the Russians in Russia want nothing to do with these Israelis. They actually hold them under contempt because they have multiple passports. They can
yeah,
come and go as they please to Israel. They often have U.S. passports as well, while Russians are pretty much told like you should be patriotic and you know stay in Russia and live your life in Russia. And then these people who tend to have money are the ones that are you know can come and go and they are seen as traitors. If you go to the comment section, I don't know if I sent you this, but there's a comment section that I went to in Russian media. It was a Russian media Telegram channel, and people are
oh
just
yeah, you
railing
did.
against the Israelis. Like there's one or two comments that are pro-Israelis, but the rest of them they dislike them as much as the entire world. So this isn't just again the Zionism is not just a thing that encapsulates Western governments. It's also touched Russia. And I think a lot
Mm.
of people have ignored that. And now this is all just coming to a front. So, yeah. So much more to talk about, but we've run out of time. I hope
Yeah,
I thought we would have like I thought we were going to be able to do it, but we
yeah.
did, but it's just a lot to say. So, um
There's a lot to cover, and discussions run away with you anyway. But anyway, I hope it brought some kind of intellectual respite for people like, in explaining what's going on. And we'll carry on trying to do that. Um, yeah,
yeah.
but thanks for listening to everyone watching, listening.
Yes, thanks for listening to our rants and you know, for all our haters out there. Well, we haven't gotten wrong yet, so we're you know, we might be painted as doomers, but we're just trying to really understand the truth of what's happening. So, thanks for joining us on that, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care.